Hello, my name's Louis McWilliam. I'm Head of Immigration at Truth Legal Solicitors. Today I'd like to talk to you about how to apply for a skilled worker sponsor license. So since the 1st of December 2020, there's been some pretty significant changes to sponsorship. What used to be called the Tier 2 sponsor license is now called a skilled worker sponsor license. It's not just a change in name, there have been some pretty significant changes to the rules around sponsorship. So I'm going to go through some of the key considerations that you need to be aware of if you want to sponsor. Then I'll look at the actual process of applying for a license itself. I would say I've written a really comprehensive legal guide to back up this talk. So if you want a bit more detail or you want to go through things in your own time, strongly recommend you look at that guide. I'll put a link to it below this video. Okay, so when you're looking at sponsorship, the first question is, well, who do I want to sponsor and can they be sponsored? So there's no point in going any further if you can't answer these questions positively. So first of all, identify the role. So you should know what the job title is going to be, but you need to identify what the classification is. So all jobs are classified by the Office for National Statistics. They decide which jobs fit into which job code. Best off to look at the Office for National Statistics website. They've got a search tool there, put in the job title, have a look at the duties and find the correct code. Okay. Once you've got the correct code, you then go to the Home Office website. There's a page called Appendix Skilled Occupations. Put in the code there. It'll tell you what the minimum salary threshold, so what the going rate is for that particular job. Okay. I should say, first of all, it has to be on under Appendix Skilled Occupations to be capable of sponsorship. Many more jobs now can be sponsored. It used to be that only, quote, highly skilled jobs could be sponsored, but now it's jobs at a lower skill level. So check it's on Appendix Skilled Occupation. Appendix Skilled Occupations will tell you the going rate for the job, so the minimum rate of pay. Now, it can get a bit confusing when you're trying to check what the minimum rate of pay is for a job, because there are potentially two rates which may apply, although only one will. Mostly it will be the rate for what's called an experienced worker. That's the sort of default position. However, there is also a rate for if the person is classified as a new entrant. There are different ways of being a new entrant, but the main ones are if you're under 26 years of age, or if you are a, quote, recent graduate from a UK university. And if you are a new entrant, so you're meeting that criteria, you can be paid less than if you're an experienced worker. So check the going rate for either an experienced worker or a new entrant, but bear in mind there is a general minimum salary threshold which will always apply. So for an experienced worker, that's 25,600. So for an experienced worker, you'll never pay less than that. But if someone's qualifying as a new entrant, then it can be significantly lower. So the minimum salary, the general threshold is 20,480. Also, if a job is on the shortage occupation list, there's a document called a shortage occupation list. If the job's on that, then lower rates of pay will also apply. So you need to check what the appropriate minimum rate of pay is for that job once you've identified that it can be sponsored. If you've got this far, then you're okay to move on to the next stage, which I would suggest is thinking about who's going to be responsible for your license. So this is sometimes called by the Home Office key personnel. There are different types of key personnel, different types of roles. I'm going to focus on the two most important ones. First up, it's the authorizing officer. This is the person who has overall responsibility for the sponsor license. Now, this is normally the most senior, the Home Office say this should be the most senior person responsible for recruitment. There's a little bit of flexibility in there about who that might be. Got to be someone fairly senior, could be a director, could be head of HR, something like that. The other key role is a level 1 user. So the authorizing officer has overall responsibility, but they don't have access to the administration of the license, which is done through a web interface called a sponsor management system. It's the level 1 user who has access to the sponsor management system. Level 1 user, you need to have at least one level 1 user who's an employee and who's a settled worker. So that normally means someone who's British or has a permanent right to live here. Home Office do background checks on key personnel. Should also say that although I've talked about two different roles here, the authorising officer and the level 1 user, those two roles can be done by the same person. Okay, other thing to bear in mind is that when you sponsor someone, there are two types of what's called certificates of sponsorship. So you need to get your license, and then you need to apply for a certificate of sponsorship to sponsor an individual person. And you'll need one certificate for each person that you want to sponsor. There are two types of certificates. There's an undefined certificate of sponsorship and a defined certificate of sponsorship. Undefined is if you are sponsoring someone who's already in the UK in some other type of visa. Okay? A defined certificate is if you're recruiting someone, if you're sponsoring someone who's currently outside of the UK. So it's important to understand which one is which, because there's slightly different processes for either of those two certificates. Next thing I want to talk about is the genuineness of the role, and this touches on whether or not you need to advertise for the position. So until the recent changes, there was something called the resident labour market test, which was a massive pain in the backside, and you, generally speaking, could only offer a job to a sponsor, or you sponsor someone if you'd already tried to advertise the job to the local workforce, the British workers. But that was all about British jobs for the British people. Thankfully, that's been abolished. So there's no longer a formal resident labour market test. However, there's now a greater emphasis on whether the role is genuine. So you have to be really careful about this, because this is one of the main ways that the Home Office could try and prevent you from sponsoring someone. There's no longer this formal resident labour market test, but you may still often have to show that you have advertised for the position. The Home Office generally just want to know how you've identified this person, how this person's come onto your radar for sponsorship. And what the guidance says that you'll normally need to advertise for the position unless you can provide a credible explanation for why you've not advertised. And they gave a few examples, but the most common one that I rely on when I'm helping my clients is if the individual's already been working for you. So it might be they've already been contracting for you overseas. That'd be a pretty good basis to not have to advertise, because you know that person's skills already. But often you'll still need to advertise. It's just not as strict, the type of advertisements, the location of the advertisements, how long you advertise for. None of that kind of strictness applies anymore. Just one more area I want to talk about before I get on to applying for a license itself, which is the not so interesting but very important topic of sponsor license compliance. So Home Office see having a sponsor license and sponsoring people as an incredibly important responsibility, and they expect you to know what your sponsor license duties and responsibilities are. So there are various rules around stuff like reporting responsibilities. So when do you have to tell the Home Office, you have to alert the Home Office to certain things happening. So for example, if the sponsored person doesn't turn up for work on the first day, you have to report to the Home Office, or if they don't turn up for work for 10 days without authorised leave, you'd have to report to the Home Office. Various rules of this type, various rules around changes to the organisation that has to be reported to the Home Office. The Home Office, when we're talking about compliance, they want to know that you've got systems in place to discharge these duties. So it's not just about knowing all these little rules, it's about having a system in place. I'm not going to go into any more detail now, but I would strongly recommend you look at the legal guide for more information around sponsor license compliance. The reason why this is really important is because the Home Office can and do come and visit you to check that you're complying with your sponsor license duties. They can visit you either before they issue you with a license, or they can visit you after they issue you with a license. They can give you notice of an inspection, which they normally do, but they can also just turn up without any announcement. So it's important to kind of get your house in order from a compliance HR perspective before you apply for a license. There are pretty serious sanctions if you don't comply with your sponsor duties. Ultimately, you can lose your license. And if you lose your license, then unfortunately, anyone who's sponsored, their employment is terminated. So very high stakes. Okay, that's a whirlwind whistle-stop tour through the key things that you need to be aware of before you apply for a license. Now, let's look at the process of applying for a sponsor license. Okay, so first of all, you have to check which documents you need as supporting evidence. Now, this is all contained in a document called Appendix A. Appendix A, which will tell you which types of documents are acceptable for the Home Office. There are various tables, 1 to 4, that you need to work through to try and get your minimum of 4 supporting documents. In certain situations, some documents are mandatory. For example, if you're a new startup, which is classed as if you've only been trading or incorporated for 18 months, you must provide evidence of having a bank account with a regulated bank. Also, if you're regulated or inspected by a regulatory body, you have to provide evidence of that. So the classic one is care homes would have to provide evidence of registration with the Care Quality Commission. So get your minimum 4 documents together there. Then you need to prepare your sponsor license cover letter. And you will need a cover letter because not only do you have to provide certain documents, but you have to provide certain information. Okay, there's mandatory information. I also recommend framing your case, so there's the kind of minimum information required, but you want to present a compelling case for why you need a sponsor license. Again, Appendix A will tell you the mandatory information that the Home Office want. So next you have the online application to complete. The application form will ask various questions about the business, who you're wanting to sponsor, who the key personnel will be. So this online application is a pretend online form in the sense that you complete the online form, but you still have to print off something called a submissions sheet. And then the next step is that you send all the documents by email to the Home Office. So you'd be sending this submissions sheet and all your supporting documents. I should say that due to recent changes, you don't need to send original documents. It's just copies. So these are scanned copies that are getting sent to the Home Office. And then the next step, well, you just wait for a decision, cross your fingers, and hope that you get your license. So that's my everything I wanted to say about applying for a sponsor license. Now, obviously at Truth Legal, we do specialize in helping companies apply for a sponsor license. We specialize in helping businesses with all steps of that process, from having a detailed consultation just to check that you understand what you're getting yourself into, and to check that the type of role that you want to sponsor can be sponsored. We will then help you with the application itself. So we'll register and complete the application form, check all your documents. We will write a compelling cover letter for you. You personally will still have to submit a license application. We will then send everything to the Home Office. Later on, you may need to request a certificate of sponsorship. We can guide you through this process. You'll need to assign that certificate of sponsorship to the individual. We'll guide you through that. And we can, of course, help with the actual visa application process itself. So that will help you from start to finish. If there's any issues around sponsor license compliance, we can help you with that too. So details of how to get in touch are below, and we're very happy to have a no obligation free consultation with you if you're thinking about applying for a sponsor license.